Hi, I'm Steve Carlisle, and this is the second video in my little mini series on the squad cost ratio rules in the English Premier League. So, in the first of this series, we talked about what the squad cost ratio was. It was the player costs divided by the revenue, the footballing revenue, and we had a basic limit. If we weren't in a European competition, we have a basic limit of 85% of the ratio between your squad costs and your revenue. And if you were in a European competition, your ratio would go down to 70%. So as long as you stayed within those figures, then you would face no sanction. Then there was a buffer zone. There was a 30% excess that you could have. So if you were not in a European competition, you could go from 85 to 115%. And if you were in that zone, you would get fined, but you wouldn't get a points deduction. And then there was the red zone where if you go above that amber zone, so if you go above the 115% limit, you'll get an automatic 6 point deduction. And thereafter, you'll get extra points deducted for every 6.5 million quid you spend above going over your red zone. Yeah, so some quite significant penalties. We'll come back to look at the problem with those at the end of this video, actually. Okay, so that's what we looked at in the first video. Let's have a look now at some of the problems that I see and some of the more intricate detail of the rules as well. So this isn't particularly a problem I'm looking at here. It might end up being, it's certainly a very strange part of the rules, and it's called the negative feedback loop. This is the name that the EPL have given it. Why give it a silly name like that? I don't know. But anyway, this is what they've called it. So this is what happens with that 30% amber limit if you start to use it up. So let's say, little example, if in 26-27, so the first year these rules apply, you actually spent squad costs that amounted to 110% of your revenue. So 110%, that's 25 percentage points above your 85% limit, assuming you're not in a European competition. So your normal limit is 85, you've gone to 110, the difference is 25%. So you've basically used up 25% of that 30%. You'll get a fine this year. That's all that will happen to you. You'll just get a fine. But what happens next year? Do you get the full 30% allowance again next year? No. That's what they mean by the negative feedback loop. Once it's used up, it's used up. So next year, instead of your buffer zone being 30%, your buffer zone will go down by 25 percentage points to just 5%. So basically what will happen, your green zone will be 85% as always, but your amber zone will only be another 5 percentage points. So it'll only be between 86% and 100. And then anything over 100, you'll be in the red zone and you'll face an automatic points deduction. So that sounds terrible, doesn't it? But you can get it back. You can get it back. It is possible to get it back. But the rules for getting it back aren't straightforward. So I'm going to have a look at the rules for getting it back. These are called the positive feedback loop rules. Again, the EPL's name, not mine. And this is what would happen if we followed that example through. So same example, in the first year, we used up 25 percentage points of our 30% allowance for the amber zone. Let's say in 27-28, though, we had a really low spending year and our ratio was only 70%, so 15 percentage points under our 85% limit. You might be thinking, and certainly I would, that you'd get 15% of that 30% back. But no, you only get 10% back. You only can ever get a maximum of 10% back in any individual year. So you can get 10% back this year. You could get 10% back the year after. And, again, if you were under, you could get the final 5% back the year after that. Yeah. So it'd take you at least 3 years to reinstate that 25% that you lost. Okay. And the other odd part of this rule is this. If in 27-28, instead of your ratio being 70%, it was actually 85%. So you were bang on. So you met the rules, you would still get 10% back. So, what was the point of being so cautious and careful in 27-28? You might as well have gone right to the 85% limit. You would have still got 10% reinstated. The rule is, as long as you meet the green zone, wherever you are on that green zone, you will get 10% back whenever you've lost it. Now, if you haven't ever lost your any of your 30% limit, you can't store up all your good years. So you can't go, let's say in 3 years down the line, you start losing some of your amber limit because you've gone over. You can't go to the EPL and go, oh, well, yeah, in the years before that, we always were under. So can we not just have it? No, you can't get it reinstated. Sorry. You can only get it reinstated once you lose it. And then any years after that, that's when you can get it reinstated. You can't get it reinstated as a result of building up, if you like, good deeds previous to you losing it. It's only once you lose it that the positive feedback loop will kick in. And any years after you losing it, you might be able to get it back. So that's how that works. That's a bit odd. That's my opinion. That's odd. That's how the thing works, though. Okay. So next thing I want to look at is what's included in these squad costs and also what's included in the revenue, because again, that's not as straightforward as you might think. So first of all, the top figure that goes onto that ratio, what we call the numerator, the figure on the top, the player cost, this is what's included. All playing staff wages. However, that excludes the youth team and the women's team wages. Now, this is a good thing for the clubs, as you'll see in a moment when we get to the revenue. This is a very positive thing. It allows the clubs to invest in those players and the costs surrounding those players, agents' fees, anything else surrounding those players in the youth team and the women's team. Obviously, there might be a bit of difficulty, between defining who's in the youth team and who's not. That will have to be clearly defined at the start of the season. And I'm assuming the clubs will have to stick by that. You can't move from one to the other. You'll notice all playing staff wages are included. So it's not just a squad of a certain number of players. If you have more players on your books, then you're being penalised for that, because you'll have to include all of their wages as long as they're not youth team or women's team. Secondly, you're going to have to include in there the head coach's wages. Now, this is strange because it's just the head coach. It's not the assistant coach. It's not the medical team. It's not any of the physios. It's nobody else, just the head coach's wages. So the first thing I thought of, well, what if one of the great head coaches, Pep, got asked by Man City to be their director of football? And they made Pep director of football, and then they gave some lower ranking coach the job of taking day-to-day training and nominally picking the team. Could they get away with that because they wouldn't have to include Pep's wages? Well, there are rules in the EPL rules which try to stop this, because the EPL can actually designate a person who isn't actually got the title head coach. They can designate that person as a member of the senior technical staff. And the club would lose out, I'm assuming, because they would then designate his wages as head coach's wages, and they would keep the wages in there of the person who was the nominal head coach. So there are rules to stop clubs doing that. I don't think it's going to be a major problem. You also have to include in there any agents' fees and sub-agents and so on. So anything involved in recruitment and retention of players. One other thing that goes on there, which I haven't yet mentioned, is the purchase of players and the amortization of those costs of those players. I want to deal with that separately, but that does go in the top figure as well. Then in the bottom figure, you've got the revenue, and it's basically just football related revenue. So it's all football or match day revenue related to the first team and any of the lower teams, reserves and so on, under 21s. They also get the revenue from youth team and women's teams events. So that's a real bonus, because you're getting the benefit on your denominator, the figure on the bottom. That will be beneficial to the ratio, and you don't have to bear the costs on the top. So that's really good for clubs, and it encourages them to have good size youth teams and women's teams. So that's a very positive step, I think, there. Also in the denominator will be the broadcaster fees and the prize money you get for winning competitions and finishing higher up the league. You'll also get your commercial sponsorship in there, and you'll also get the profit. Now, it's the profit only from any events held at your venue. So if you are at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium and you're putting on NFL games, you're putting on pop concerts and so on, then you will be allowed to add the profit from those. Now, that's an area the clubs, they could fudge a little bit, because, the profit is basically the revenue from the event less the costs associated with the event. And I, as an accountant, know that accountants will then try and say, oh, well, some of those costs aren't really associated with that event and we will just ignore them. So there is a little bit of leeway, that a little bit of an opportunity to take liberties by the finance team there. It won't be massive, but it might be an area of controversy, particularly if you're very, very close to the limit, as we'll see later. So those are the figures that go in the top and the bottom, the basic figures. But I now want to deal with player purchases and player sales, because player purchases and player sales will both affect these figures. So let's have a look at player purchases, and player sales. So first of all, player purchases. A lot of you might be familiar with the idea of what we do with player purchases, because the same idea a lot of people heard about when we had the old PSR rules, because we in the football world use normal accounting rules, and the normal accounting rules, if you buy a legal right, like the right to a player's contract, is that if that legal right is going to last you for a long period of time, anything over a year, then you'll normally take the cost of that legal right, in this case, the player contract, and you'll spread it over the length of that contract. So got a little example here. If you buy a player for 30 million in 26-27 and they've got a 5-year contract, then you spread that 30 million cost over 5 years. So you get 6 million in 26-27's top figure, 6 million in 27-28's top figure, and so on until the end of 5 years. Now, there is a proviso here, which also came in at the end of the PSR rules as well, which is that you can only have a maximum period of amortizing a player contract of 5 years. So if a player had 8-year contract, you'd still only be able to spread the cost over 5 years. If the contract is less than 5 years, let's say it was a 3-year contract, then you'd spread over 3 years. It's only if you go over 5 years that there's this maximum limit you can spread it. So I would think we won't see player contracts for longer than 5 years, but I would think we'll see a lot of player contracts that are at exactly 5 years, because it gives you the maximum time to spread this cost in the top. You don't want that cost hitting the top figure all at once. So that's probably what you'll see, lots of 5-year contract. Then we come to the oddity, player sales. Now, to me as an accountant, when you sell an asset, like the player's contract is an asset, when you sell an asset, any profit you make on sale should be something that you deduct from your costs. So I would have expected it as an accountant to go player sale profits to go in the top figure, but no, the EPL have said no, we're not going to go with a normal accounting wisdom. We're actually going to make player sales part of the bottom figure, the revenue figure. Okay, that might make sense to you as a non-accountant, fair enough. But there's something odd with this. I've got that little example I'm going to follow through. So let's say in 28-29, we sell this same player, as in the top example, for £48 million. Now, the book value of the player, the value that the player will be in our books, in our balance sheet at, is, well, we bought him for 30 million. We amortized his contract by 6 million in year one, and then we amortized it by a further 6 million in year two. So that's 12 million off that. So the value he's in our books at is 18 million. It's a bit like having a car and the value of the car goes down each year. That's the same thing that's happening here. The player's value, or the value of the player's contract, is amortizing each year. So the player's in the books at 18 million. We sell him for 48 million. So the difference between the two, 48 less 18, is a 30 million profit. And you'd think that 30 million will therefore go straight onto that revenue line. But no, the EPL has said, we don't want that to happen. We want to spread that profit, and we're always going to spread it over 3 years. Always 3 years. Yeah. Whoever the player is, whatever their original contract was, we're going to spread that profit in the bottom figure over 3 years. So we'll take 10 million in 28-29, 10 million in 29-30, and 10 million in 30-31. I don't know why they've done that. That's a really bizarre and arbitrary rule. There is a justification for it on the EPL website, which you can read, but to me, it's, a little bit odd, a little bit strange. That's what they've decided to do, though. I don't make the rules. I'm just reporting them to you. Okay. The most controversial thing, and the thing that I think is going to really cause massive problems, though, is the last thing I'm going to talk about here, which is the timings of the punishment. So what the EPL wanted to avoid is this scenario that we all hate, that you break the rules in 1999 and you don't get a punishment until 2015. This it does it's not obviously it's not normally as long as that, but you know what I mean? The big gap between you doing something wrong and then you getting the punishment and the possible points deduction, and you know, and it's hanging on your back for years and years and years. It's you know, it's a sword hanging over you. You're waiting for it to fall. So what they've decided in their wisdom, which sounds good, but it's not, is that you will get punished for this season's breaches in this season. So when you breach these rules, when you go over your amber limit or your red limit in 26-27, you will get punished in 26-27. And the mad thing for me is that includes getting a points deduction. Why is it mad? Well, because it will be based on figures which are estimated figures. They won't have even gone in the final accounts, and they certainly won't have been audited. And you could get a points deduction in 26-27 if you go over the red limit. And in actual fact, it might come out in the wash once your figures are properly reviewed and audited that you actually didn't go over the red limit. How on earth are they going to unravel that? Now, there are provisos that you should be compensated and so on. There are things written into the rules to say you'll get a compensation. But as we know, it's no compensation if you drop down the table as a result of a points deduction, which could, in theory, happen. So let me go through the rules. This is what happens. As I mentioned in the first video, right now, I'm sitting here in May 26. The clubs will be preparing their budgets. They'll be budgeting for their squad cost ratio figures, the top figure and the bottom figure. They'll be doing that now to make sure they meet the EPL's rules next year. And obviously, they'll all be trying to stick within the 85% limit or the 70% limit if they're in a European competition. Okay, so you'll be preparing your budgeted figures. Everybody would do that. That's normal practice for any business to prepare their budgeted figures. But what you do is you give those figures to the EPL. So once that budget's finished, and if a club's financial year starts on the 1st of July, they'll all have finished it by the 1st of July. They'll give that budget to the EPL, and the EPL will review the budget, and then they will agree it. So the EPL will say, your projected revenue, that's the main figure, your projected revenue figure, and of course your projected squad cost figure, those figures look reasonable based on what we've seen from you before. That will be, as I said on the first video, that'll be reasonably easy for them to do if you're an established Premier League club. It won't be that easier if you've just come up from the Championship, or if you're a club that yo-yos a little bit in the EPL. But if you're an established club, that'll be easy for them to do. Bit harder if you've come up, or a bit harder if you move around the Premier League from season to season in terms of your finishing position and in terms of your cup performance. Okay, but they'll agree that. Now, what the EPL then say is that revenue figure in particular will be more or less fixed for when they do their review. It'll be more or less fixed. And they say that because they want to try and protect clubs from any fall-offs in revenue if a catastrophic event happens within the club and that they don't, for some reason, get the revenue in the year that they thought they were going to. So that revenue figure is more or less fixed. The squad cost figure at the top, that can vary because, of course, we've got the January transfer window, which could have a major impact on that squad cost figure. So what the EPL say is, what we're going to do is we're going to review your ratio again on the 1st of March. So in the first year, that'll be the 1st of March 2027. So we'll get the clubs to make a submission on the 1st of March, which will include their transfer window dealings. They might have bought a player, they might have sold a player. And what the EPL will do is they will take the original budgeted figures and they will adjust them for player costs and for player sales income. So the figure at the top will change, the figure at the bottom will change. I'm not 100% sure, but the clubs may also be able to point out to the EPL at this stage major changes or potentially mistakes that they made in their original submission. But based on this submission on the 1st of March, now bear in mind, the season hasn't finished yet. The final squad cost figures and the final revenue figures haven't even happened yet. They won't happen until the year's done on the 30th of June, if that's the club's financial year end. But based on these figures and the projections for the rest of the year, so based on the figures to the 1st of March and the projected figures for the March itself, April, May, and June. That's a third of the year. They will then say which zone you're in, whether you're in the green zone, amber zone, or red zone. And if you're in the amber zone, they will fine you. But the thing about a fine is they can always unravel the fine after the season, when the accounts are audited, and that's happy days. But they'll also deduct points if you're over the red zone. So if you're over the red zone, you'll get a 6-point deduction and a further 1 point for every 6.5 million over the red zone you go. So that could be catastrophic. It could change you from being, I don't know, 15th to going to 19th. Yeah. Look at how tight the season is this year. Yeah. 6-point deduction. And also it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? Because if they deduct 6 points, I mean, there is an appeal process against this, by the way, and it has to be done very quickly. But you can imagine these things might end up dragging on a little bit. And your squad is going to be playing under the shadow of having had 6 points deducted. And that's just a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of, it'll affect the morale of the team and the supporters and all the rest of it. It just seems balmy to me. I know what they're trying to do, a good thing and have an instant punishment, but they're almost punishing you for something you haven't yet done, because your full figures haven't yet actually happened. This is based on what's happened up to the 1st of March. And even then, those figures haven't been audited. And then what is predicted to happen from the 1st of March to the 30th of June. And that hasn't happened at all yet. So I'm looking at my own team, Leeds United, and where they might end up in the league. And we could go up several places, which would make a major difference to the prize money that we might get. So our predictions for the year are a little bit up and down. Look at what happened to Sunderland. Who would have predicted at the beginning of the year Sunderland would do as well as I mean, just if you're a Sunderland fan, you might have done. But who would have predicted that? It's just it beggars belief. It just seems absolutely bonkers. So we'll see how it plays out. They're just my views on this timings thing. I've told you how the timings work. That's not a view. All these dates are correct. But my view is all about how chaotic it might be. So anyway, let's see how it plays out. That's my little take on it. Thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the close season and all the fabulous transfer flurries and speculation that are going to keep us entertained during a boring World Cup year. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.